Let's now turn to look at workforce structure. So with the rise of remote working in the gig economy, traditional rewards like bonuses, company perks, could give way to more flexible options, such as, I don't know, remote working allowances perhaps, flexible scheduling and paid time off. While the gig workforce offers a real promise of flexibility, cost savings, and access to diverse talent, it also poses, unsurprisingly, some risks and challenges to employers, policymakers, and platform companies, platform enterprises. These challenges relate to job security, platform dependency, and exploitation of staff. So, question to our panel, how are reward systems coping with the rise of the gig workforce? What further changes do you anticipate over the next few years? So, Kathrin, I'm going to turn to you first.
I'm not sure it's coping very well. I think I would say is I would actually pick up on what you said earlier. And I remember a talk, and I think it was, in fact, I think Peter, you might have been, that's years ago, when I think Unilever was talking about this, of kind of taking it beyond the employees. Who are the people we should be taking an interest in? It's really, I think it's a continuation of this theme. And I think ultimately with the skills scarcity, I think it's there, but I'm not sure we're doing it very thoughtfully. And as I was thinking about the question, I think for me, one of the things that came to mind is really about the strategic workforce planning, which seems kind of weird in the context of we're trying to be agile because it's ever more uncertain, it's ever faster. But I do think there's something in this strategic workforce planning of making a deliberate choice about the mix that you would like, and then actually build deliberately and in a structured way towards that, and then stick and back your horse, almost in getting this mix right, knowing your business and knowing it's unpredictable, knowing it is uncertain, but building that, because I think the companies that I think will, in many ways, startups and young companies have a huge advantage over the large established corporates, because there's fewer things to change. And coming back with the micropilot, they can just start off as a micropilot to start off with. They have less structure to remove, less people to convince, less things to negotiate with. And so I think it's for me, there's a lot of opportunity, but again, I think most companies are still working through as to how we do it in a systematic way. I don't think we've given enough structured thought to it. We have all of us have I think substantial populations of gig workers, but I don't think we've really even touched the sides of this in a meaningful way yet. So I think there's a lot more to do.
Great, thanks, Kathrin. This links to our earlier conversation. Ashok's point about skills databases, lovely idea, but how do you make it, the devil's in the detail, how do you make it work? And also our earlier conversation about risk aversion. Part of what's shaping this is we'd love to have introduce optionality in how we do our strategic workforce planning. Often what hinders us is our risk aversion. We're stuck with what we've done in the past, and we're not attracted to changing it. So thank you, Kathrin. Dominic.
I mean, what was the statistic you had earlier about the number of the
40 and 0?
Because this is quite interesting for us as our profession, because actually if that number keeps growing, the procurement team who manage the contracts for these big gig people are going to are being responsible for more money in people's jeans than we are going to be going forward. So actually, totally. We need to muscle in on this one, actually, make sure we don't become obsolete ourselves. But actually, it's fraught with complication. I was again sort of thinking about in preparation for this, and what is preventing us sort of embracing the gig economy. I mean, legislation for one. I mean, our legal team are always advising, well, you need to do this because otherwise they'll be seen as an employee. You can't do that. You can't give them a bonus, and you shouldn't give them benefits. The tax jurisdiction means that you can't rely on people in foreign countries to be able to sort of fill the gap. And I think there's some interesting legislation worked through the US on that as well, about antitrust, or anti-abuse. So I think that it's a really interesting topic. We need to get behind it as a reward community to say, okay, how do we help our procurement colleagues to put in place whatever incentivization or benefits or whatever else is going to engage the gig workforce to come and work for us as an organisation because they have ultimate choice. They can go and work for anybody, they can job. And that might be around things like, I don't know, financial planning, because that's probably something that's front of mind, or training or certification of skills. But we do need to think about this, otherwise we are going to be responsible for the smaller amount of money that is being delivered through an organisation
through the person
than our procurement teams are. But legislation, taxation and everything else is working against us in this fact, because actually we try and turn someone, you think, okay, well, let's give them some benefits, then you start turning them into employees and they get employment rights and our employment council gets worried, or actually this we can do this work out of Canada, then our tax people get concerned. So there's a lot of tensions and complexity to this that is going to make it difficult, but we as an industry do need to lean in and say, okay, well, how can we make this gig workforce more productive, more engaged, more likely to come work for us, just as we have with our employees. But it isn't straightforward because there's a number of constraints.
Interesting. It also raises the possibility of a whole capability within the reward function of educating, negotiating with regulators.
Yes.
Because there's, you look at the younger generations. For a lot of them, a particular segment, I guess. The gig economy is very attractive. Not all of them. Again, we're back to discrimination, right? Some of them will love it. Some of them do it because they have to.
What we can do as an organisation maybe is make our employee workforce have some of the advantages of the gig side. So I think we have this debate constantly in companies. Is people want to go off? I want to go travelling for 4 months. Well, you can't do it. You have to resign. Or maybe they don't. And so I think we could probably make our employees more like gig employees if they want to be.
That's interesting.
In a way that actually maybe stops them leaving the organisation or going off and becoming a contractor. So we could maybe blend what it looks like and treat some of our employees, especially the younger ones. Well, okay, we can be more flexible about how you're going to work, and maybe that comes down to sort of, you're not going to get a bonus, you're just going to get base pay, but you're employed by us and we'll let you go for 4 months to travel around Southeast Asia and come back as an employee. So maybe there's some blending we can do that actually, we can do that within the realms of legislation and tax.
Yeah, get creative.
Yes,
try to get creative. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic I love. Broadly speaking, helpful to characterise people in maybe 4 buckets. You sort of say to yourself, there are some people whose skills I can simply purchase. And, there's that horrible word fungible. They're replaceable. And there's a kind of race to the bottom where most of the time big organisations are outsourcing those kind of roles. You talk to the people on reception, you talk to people in catering, in maintenance, and actually they don't work for you. They work for a big company that supplies that skill to you. But they think they work for you. Yeah? So it's important to remember that those people think that they work for you. And in fact, many of them used to before you outsource them to that big supplier. Second group of people are probably people who are, well, let's deal with this one first, which is the big, broad bunch of associated people, many of which aren't in real employment of any kind, influencers, people who in your ecosystem, they impact the success of your company. They're advocates, but they're not and never will be paid directly by you. Okay, now they're out there. There's probably a massive number of those, and you need to look after them, because if they turn against you for any reason, that's not good for your business. So you need to be conscious of them. Okay, that leaves us with people who have normal kind of skills, which unfortunately is exactly where our reward population focuses. Right. So these are typically permanent, full-time employees. And actually, if we're not careful, we'll shrink ourselves down into irrelevance if we focus on them. The last group of people are what I describe, people with the secret sauce that make your company great. Without those people, your company has no future. You've got to look after those people very carefully and provide them with something of great interest. And this could be where the whole thing of hyper-personalization has its real impact. It could be that you want to focus on those people because you're investing in that talent for the future. And you probably need to be a lot more imaginative, a lot more creative to glue them into the organisation over the longer term, because they do have a choice. A lot of those other people, they have a choice, but it doesn't really bother you that much. But if the people with the secret sauce walk out the door, you've got a big problem for the future. Yeah. So that's probably where we need to spend quite a lot of our time and effort. However, if we lose sight of the rest of that population, we've done the organisation a great disservice, because as reward professionals, we understand better about how people are motivated. So you take those people who maybe you want to keep on the periphery, they've got pretty good skills, but they don't really want, you can buy those premium skills in the market, they're better from an outsourced provider, but they're more premium than just fungible. Those are the kind of people who you want to give some kind of learning experience, some kind of accreditation experience, something that they can carry forward as an investment in themselves that will reflect well on you as somebody they'll keep coming back to. As you can see, I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to stop now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. What I'm taking away from that, we're building on this, what we've talked about earlier about discrimination and segmentation of the population, not using a one-size-fits-all for everyone. And the other thing that comes out to me is what's valuable to them and what's valuable to us is very different for each of your four categories.
Absolutely.
Right? And your reward approach, philosophy, completely varies. So, for example, the secret source individuals, you almost want a concierge service for them in terms of reward. It's like, what can we do for you? Because you are so valuable to us, and they're so valuable to potentially others, competitors. Great. Thank you, Peter. Mike?
Yeah, 100% agree with all the tableau of great comments. This is emblematic, I think, really of where reward is stuck in the past. So this is a spaghetti soup, we know that, we acknowledge that. But building on Kathrin's point, so do you build your talent or you buy your talent? So if you buy it, of course, they're coming from an outside labor participation in a given G10 country that has stratification for gig workers, freelancers, tech, and some that still want to work for a company long term. But it's very disparate. So you're going out and trying to grab folks that have a very different antenna when they're looking at life. And then within your company workforce plan, be it a Shell or a BP, I'm presuming, you look 30 years out and you say, what's the composition of workforce that you wish to desire to compose who you run as a company? And there's a big dichotomy there. So you've got that sort of distillation going on. Then you've got, like I'm a perfect example. So I have spent 30 years going around the world as a freelance gig worker, and I love it. I have no intention for working for a company, one single company for 30 years and get a DB plan. That's not me. And there's a lot of people in our echelon reward that sort of design these programs programmatically for folks that stick around for a long time.
Yes.
And they're also stewards of the ship that they're doing it themselves. And I'm a completely diametric opposite reward guy, that I want to design freedom, flexibility, gig, cryptocurrency, because that's been my life. And there are a lot of people like us and me that, I got called on a job in Japan. I'm going. And there's a lot of people like that in the world, and they don't want to stick around for 30 years and be on a long-term employment contract. In the US, my home, employment at will. Should Europe move to at-will employment? Asia has variations of that, as we know, in Singapore and Hong Kong. So we're confounded and colluding around concepts that have been around so long.
Yes.
And we have to disintermediate and blow this model up. And there are examples out there to which to do it. So
Really
I'll get off my pedestal.
Echoes of what Kathrin said about the difference between monolithic big organizations and these little flexible minnows that are
fungible.
Small and fast moving and playing with all sorts of different models. So thank you, Mike. Really interesting. And finally, Ashok.
I guess for me, when I look at the changing workforce structure, probably 5 issues that come to mind. The first one is, I think, we'll start with where Mike left us in this, which is about most large organizations which have been around for a while. We have a multi-generational workforce.
Yes.
So that segmentation we talk about happens just within a corporation. If you look at Unilever, look at BP, we have these. And the challenge for us is, how do you segment that workforce and meet the needs of those different bits of those segments?
Without overcomplicating it.
Without overcomplicating it. And then that's where you get into all these things about personalization and choice and what matters to each group, etc. So there's one big bucket about organizations that can do that nimbly and with pace, and as part of their value proposition, they're going to attract the best and retain the best. So there's one big bucket to play at that. I think the second big thing I think we're all going to be confronted with is fairness in pay. And what is the role that corporations have in how we manage fairness? So I looked at one data point. In the UK, 10% of households hold 45% of the wealth. 10% of households hold 45% of the wealth. The bottom 50% hold 10%. Right? And we talk about gig workers, etc. How are we ensuring, what's the role of corporations in ensuring there's fair pay, especially for frontline staff? Because that's where the vast numbers are, and how do you ensure fairness? So as we think about changing workforce structures, fairness in pay, a dimension of societal fairness. The second issue for me is again fairness, but is a different dimension, which is intergenerational fairness.
Oh, yes.
So I look at baby boomers, and they've got significant accumulated wealth. They're on the good old DB pension plans, etc.
Yeah.
And then you've got the new generation coming through, where wages are stagnating. They haven't been able to create that kind of wealth so far. But there's an interesting conundrum, because their work lifestyle choices that are being made feel quite different. So the organization's ability to understand that intergenerational fairness and what matters, I think that's going to kick in as well in terms of when you look at workforce structures. The third thing we've spoken about a lot is the nomadic worker. So I like to work from anywhere. Very alluring concept. But when you sit down and actually try and work your way through it, social security obligations, tax obligations, location obligations, etc., it kicks up more dust than you want. But again, which organizations are able to sort of tackle that and wrestle that issue to the ground? I think that's where the biggest success is going to lie. And finally, I want to just close off with this issue of back for me is about skills. And gig workforce is about skills and what skills you bring to the fore. And how are organizations able to understand that, comprehend it, list it all out, manage it on a sustainable basis. I think that's going to make the difference. So for me, it's about segmentation within large organizations. There's a large thing on fairness and how fairness works. And the third bucket for me is going to be about the nomadic worker and how that compelling work proposition, how do you bring that to life?
A great summary of our discussion on the gig economy. I want to point out one particular thing. Here we are talking about, in a discussion about the future of world of work and how it's going to affect the practice of reward. And you pointed out a couple of things around different aspects of fairness. And really what strikes me about what you're saying is this is beyond reward. This is beyond the world of work, right? It's about the purpose of the corporation. Shareholder capitalism says, the shareholder is king or queen. But you're really pointing to a very different aspect of what about equity between the poor and the rich, the poorer and the richer, equity between the young and the old. And so interesting, echoes also what Peter said about reaching out to, you call them influencers, but the ecosystem within sector, outside sector, because everything's more connected. So again, thank you for that brilliant summary, Ashok. Anyone want to add anything to this really interesting discussion on the gig economy? Peter, please.
I think it's about fairness. I mean, we came across a good phrase in innovation, which is people want to be valued, recognised, and fairly rewarded. That's the voice of the employee. They want to be valued, they want to be recognised, and they want to be fairly rewarded. There's nothing new about this. No. The only thing that's now new is that they probably have more bargaining power about that than they had in the past, because of the general democratization of information in society. So there are very few secrets these days. Yes. And so we all live in a bit of a goldfish bowl, and therefore the visibility of unfairness is heightened, and people's sensitivity to it is heightened too. And I don't think it's a generational thing. I think it's really down to information. Everybody was always concerned about fairness. It's just now, we can kind of do something about it, which is very different. And I think we need to move with that change in society And if we don't move to it with it, we have got problems. And I think that's very much the responsibility of reward people to inject into what we do with pay more fairness. If our directors' remuneration reports weren't so boring, then maybe more people would read them and they would be outraged by what we do, outraged by what big companies do and how much they pay to senior people. Yeah. But fortunately, they haven't accessed that yet. Yes. But it won't take long before that becomes part of a company's brand image. You know, is how do you actually pay people, especially at the most senior level?
But I think the trick, Peter, is exactly in what you said is, to me, as reward professionals, it's not about the fact that someone hasn't picked up the director's remuneration report and read it and said, how could you possibly do that? But for those of us who have such close proximity and access to data, I just point to an obligation we have as professionals to society, that there's an element of fairness here. You have to look across, up and down, and say, is what we are doing in supporting our corporations, does it feel fair? Legislation can push you to a certain direction, but we should pick the cue from that, whether it's gender or ethnic minority or frontline staff. But we have that more than anybody else. We have the access to data. We understand actually what's going on in corporations, and are we doing enough to drive that fairness and making sure that the workforce feels we're being fair.
And I think it's very much top and bottom. So there's nothing wrong with high pay. In fact, high pay is what pulls the rest of society upwards. I firmly believe that. However, we need to look after the bottom end too. Living wage. We need to make sure that we're not discriminating against people. And if we can do those two things, then I think we can make progress. But that requires the reward person, especially the most senior reward person, to have a very holistic view of everything that's going on, rather than breaking the reward organisation up into silos, where we've kind of delegated our responsibility here, there and everywhere.
So dare I say it, a more joined up perspective on the whole population, on the whole purpose of reward. One thing that also strikes me is that, talking about reward professionals, Ashok, there's what I'm hearing from you is an intrinsic fairness. We must, for its own sake, we should do this. But also, from what Peter's saying, in the long run, it's probably in the self-interest of the corporation to address this, because there might be reputational damage once the wider audience understands what's at play here. Thank you so much, all of you. I want to say again, thank you. Thank you, Ashok, Kathrin, Peter, Dominic, and Mike. Thank you so much for such a rich discussion. I really enjoyed it. And we'll continue this conversation around the world, next in Dubai. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Well done.
Thank you.